Chapter 7 from Cherry Badis into Siklau. The night comes on in early January. The streets were already growing dark with Gringor quitted the palace. This nightfall pleased him. He longed to reach some obscure and solitary ally, that he might there meditate at his ease, and that the philosopher might lay the first healing balm to the wounds of the poet. Philosophy was indeed his only refuge, for he knew not where to find a lodging place. After the signal failure of his first dramatic attempt, he dared not to return to that which he occupied in the Rue Grenier sur Lier, opposite to the Port au Faune, having reckoned upon what the provost was to give him for his epithalamium to enable him to pay to Guillaume Dolcer, collector of the taxes upon cloven-footed beasts brought into Paris, the 6 months' rent which he owed him, that is to say 12 pence of Paris, 12 times the value of all the possessions in the world, including his breeches, his shirt, and his hat. After a moment's reflection, while sheltered under the wicket gate of the prison belonging to the treasure of the state chapel, as to what palace of refuge he should settle for the night, all the pavements of Paris being at his service, he recollected having espied the week before in the Rue de la Savatiere, at the door of parliamentary councillor, a footstone for mounting on muleback, and having remarked to himself that this stone might serve upon occasion at the excellent pillow for a beggar or a poet. He thanked Providence for having sent him this happy idea, but as he was preparing to cross the square for the palace in order to reach the tortuous labyrinth of the city formed by the windings of all those sister streets, the Rue de la Berlerie, Rue de la Ville Draperie, Rue de la Salvaterie, Rue de la Giverie, etc., which are still standing, with their houses of 9 stories, he saw the procession of the Fool's Pope, which was also including from the palace and rushing across the courtyard with loud shouts, with great glare of torches, and with Gringor's own band of music. This sight revived the blow to his pride, and he fled. In the bitterness of his dramatic misadventure, everything which recalled to his mind the festival of the day irritated his wound and made it bleed afresh. He turned to cross the bridge of Saint Michel, where he found boys running up and down with squibs, and crackers. A plague on the fireworks, said Gringor, and he turned back upon the Exchange Bridge. Attached to the front of the house at the entrance of the bridge were 3 banners representing the king, the dauphin, and Margaret of Flanders, and 6 bannerets on which were portrayed the Duke of Austria, the Cardinal de Bourbon, and Monsieur de Biéjou, Madame Jean of France, and Monsieur the Bastard of Bourbon, and I know not who else, all illuminated by torches, in a crowd admiring, Happy painter, Johann Forbalt, said Gringor with a heavy sigh as he turned his back upon the banners. A street lay before him, and it seemed so dark and forsaken that he hoped there to escape his mental suffering as well as the illuminations. He plunged into it accordingly. A few moments later, his foot struck against some obstacles. He stumbled and fell. It was a bundle of hawthorn which the clerks had placed in the morning at the door of President of the Parliament in honor of the day. Happy painter Johann Farbalt, said Gringor with a heavy sigh. As he turned his back upon the banners, a street lay before him, and it seemed so dark and forsaken that he hoped there to escape his mental sufferings as well as the illuminations. He plunged into it accordingly. A few moments later, his foot struck against some obstacle. He stumbled and fell. It was the bundle of hawthorn which the clerks had placed in the morning at the door of a president of the Parliament in honor of the day. Gringor bore this new accident heroically. He arose and reached the waterside. After leaving behind him the silver tower and the criminal tower, and passing along by the high wall of the king's garden, on that unpaved shore in which he sank to the ankles in mud, he arrived at the western end of the city and stood gazing for some time at the small island of the pastoral ox Vaches, which has since disappeared under the bronze horse and esplanade of the Pont Neuf. The islet appeared to his eyes in the darkness as a black mass beyond the narrow stream of whitish water which separated him from it. He could discern by the rays of a small glimmering light a sort of hut in the form of a beehive in which the ferryman sheltered himself during the night. Happy ferryman, thought Gringor, thou dreamest not of glory, thou writtest not wedding songs. What are the marriages of king and Burgundian duchess to thee? Thou knowest no marguerites. Thou knowest no marguerites, but the daisies which thy April greensward gives thy crowd to crop. While I, a poet, am hooted and shiver, and owe 12 pence, and my shoe sole is so transparent that thou mightest use it to glaze thy lantern. Thanks, ferryman. Thy cabin gives rest to my eyes and makes me forget Paris. He was awakened from his almost lyric ecstasy by a great double St. John's rocket, which suddenly arose from the peaceful cabin. It was the ferryman also taking his share of the festivities of the day and letting off his fireworks. This rocket sent a shiver through Gringor. Oh, cursed holiday, cried he. Wilt thou follow me everywhere, good God, even to the ferryman's hut? Then he looked into the sighing scene at his feet and felt a horrible temptation. Oh, said he, how willing would I drown myself if the water were not so cold. Then he took a desperate resolution. It was since he could not escape the fool's pope, Johann Forbalt's painting, the bundles of hawthorn, the squibs, and the rocket, to plunge boldly into the very heart of the illumination and go to the place de grève. At least, thought he, I shall perhaps get a brand to warm my fingers at a bonfire, and I shall manage to sup on some morsel from the 3 great shields of royal sugar that were to be set out on the public refectory. There remains today but a small and scarcely perceptible vestige of the palace de Grave such as it existed formerly. Formerly, all that is left is the charming turret which occupies the northern angle of the square and which already buried under the ignoble whitewashing which obstructed the delicate lines of his carving will soon, perhaps, have totally disappeared under that increase of new houses which is so rapidly consuming all the facades in Paris. Those who like ourselves those who like ourselves never pass over the Place de Grève without casting a look of pity and sympathy on the poor little tower, squeezed between two ruins of the time of Louis XV, can easily reconstruct in their mind's eyes the assemblage of edifices to which it belonged, and thus imagine themselves in the old Gothic square of the 15th century. It was then, as now, an irregular place, bounded on one side by the quay, and on the three others by a series of lofty houses, narrow and sombre. In the daytime, you might admire the variety of these buildings, carved in stone or in wood, and already presenting complete examples of the various kinds of domestic architecture of the Middle Ages, going back from the 15th to the 11th century, from the perpendicular window which was beginning to supersede the Gothic to the circular Roman arch, which the Gothic had in turn supplanted, and which still occupied underneath the first story of that ancient house of the Tour Roland, forming the angel of the place with the sign on the side of the Rue de la Tannerie. By night, nothing was distinguishable of that mass of building but the black indentation of their gables, extending its range of acute angles round the three sides of the place. For it is one of the essential differences between the towns of that day and those of the present, that now it is the fronts of the house that look to the squares and streets, but then it was the gable ends. During the 2 centuries past they have turned fairly around. In the century of the eastern side of the square rose a heavy and hybrid construction formed by 3 dwellings juxtaposed. The whole was called by 3 several names, described its history, its purpose, and its architecture. The Maison au Dauphin, or Dauphin's House, because Charles V, when Dauphin had lived there. The Trades House, because it was used as the Hotel de Ville, or town hall, and the Maison Ox Pillars, or piliers, or pillar house, on account of a series of heavy pillars which supported its 3 stories. The city had there all that a goodly town like Paris needs: a chapel to pray in, a courtroom for holding magisterial sittings, and when needed, reprimanding the king's officers, and in the garrets an arsenal stored with artillery and ammunition. For the good people of Paris, well knowing that it was not sufficient in every emergency to plead and to pray for the franchises of their city, had always in reserve, in the attic of the town hall, some few good though rusty arquebuses, arquebuses. The square of La Greve had then that sinister aspect which it still derives from the execrable ideas which it awakens, and from the gloomy looking town hall built by Dominique Bocador, which has taken the palace of the mason ox Pilier Pil-airs. It must be observed that a permanent gibbet and pillory, a justice and a ladder, as they were then called, erected side by side in the center of the square, contributed not a little to make the passerby avert his eyes from this fatal spot, where so many beings in full life and health had suffered their last agony, and which was to give birth 50 years later to that Saint Valér's fever, as it was called, that disease which was but the terror of the scaffold, the most monstrous of all maladies, infected as it was not by the hand of God, but by that of man. It is consolatory, we may remark, to reflect that the punishment of death, which 3 centuries ago, with its iron wheels, with its stone gibbets, with all its apparatures for torture permanently fixed in the ground, encumbered the square of the Greve, the market palace, the palace of Dauphin, the Crux de Trahor, the pig market, the hideous Montfaucon, the Barriere des Surgeons, the Place aux Chats, the Gate of Saint Denis, Champots, the Baudet's Gate, the Porte Saint Jacques, not to mention the innumerable pillories of the provost, of the bishop, of the chapters, of the abbots, of the priors who dealt justice, not to mention judicial drownings in the river Seine. It is consolatory to reflect that now, after losing one after another every fragment of her panoply, after profusion of executions, her refined and fanciful penal laws, her torture for applying which she made anew every 5 years a bed of leather in the Grand Châtelet. This ancient queen of feudal society, nearly thrust from our laws and our towns, tracked from code to code, driven from place to place, now possesses in our vast metropolis of Paris but one dishonored corner of the Greve, but one miserable guillotine, stealthy, timid, ashamed, which seems always afraid of being taken in the act. So quickly does it disappear after giving its blows. When Pierre Gringo arrived at the Place de Grève, he was benumbed with cold. When Pierre Gringo arrived at the Place de Grève, he was benumbed with cold. He had gone over the Miller's Bridge to avoid the crowd on the Pont au Change and Jehan Forbalt's banners, but the wheels of all the bishop's mills had splashed him as he crossed, so that his coat was wet through, and it seemed to him that the fate of his peace had rendered him even colder. Accordingly, he hurried towards the bonfire which burned magnificently in the middle of the place. A considerable crowd, however, encircled it. You villainous Parisians, you villainous Parisians, said he to himself. So now you keep me from the fire, and yet I've good need of a chimney corner. My shoes are sponges in the water, and then all those execrable mills have been raining upon me. The devil take the Bishop of Paris with his mills. I wonder what a bishop can do with a mill. Does he think, from being a bishop, to turn miller? If he only wants my malediction to do so, I hereditally give it him, in his cathedral and his mills. Let us see now if any of those lazy rascals will disturb themselves.